All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Overcoming Obstacles, Persistence, and Problem Solving in Conservation Projects. I'm Liz Gagnon, Sea Grant Fellow for the Climate Ready program here at the Coastal Conservancy. And as you can imagine, over the course of the Conservancy's 40 years, we've dealt with some challenges in our conservation work, but we've also gotten a lot of great work done. Our hope for this presentation is to provide some insight into how to overcome the challenges inherent to conservation work and share examples of how the Conservancy has been able to push past those obstacles. The Conservancy is often viewed as a funding source. However, we have years of experience providing technical assistance to help our partners move projects forward and make them happen, from navigating through the process to maintaining strong partnerships, or from simply seeing a project through from start to finish, regardless of how long it may take. We hope you walk away from this webinar with some ideas of what might help you have success in your own projects. But to frame our conversation today, I want to talk about how uncertainty about the future and the environment is often at the heart of most obstacles in conservation work. And we found that this is often played out in three overarching themes. Financial challenges, of course, but also procedural, such as permitting or evaluating environmental impact, and social, such as building consensus and taking inputs from all stakeholders. So today we'll be taking a deep dive into 3 case studies, and in each of these you will find some combination of these obstacles and learn how the Conservancy played a role in overcoming them. Most of all, I think you'll find that the Conservancy's endurance in helping a partner or grantee accomplish their goals is a shared thread in all of these stories. So before we jump in, I want to take a quick poll to see what you all feel is the most challenging conservation obstacle you have faced in your work. And as you're taking a few moments to answer that, I also want to let you know that you're all on mute, but you're welcome to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll dedicate time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A session with all of our speakers. So we'll wait a couple more minutes for folks to finish up the poll. All right, so now we'll show the results. Oh, great. So it looks like procedural is what you all find is the most challenging, followed by financial and then social last. So great. That's a very interesting set of results. Okay, so now we'll get started with Rachel Couch, who will go over her work at the Glial Slough in Santa Barbara, followed by Sam Jenniches talking about the Matilija Dam Removal Project in Southern California. And finally, we'll have Michael Bowen tell us about the Eel River Delta Restoration Project up in Humboldt. So Rachel, take it away.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of examples of the obstacles we overcame and lessons learned as Conservancy staff worked with partners in the Goleta Slough ecosystem. And just to give you a hint of what I'll be talking about, this slide shows the system in flood stage in March 2014, just before the mouth of the slough breached. I will cover there we go. I will cover a little bit about the slough setting and then highlight a couple of cases where obstacles, mostly procedural, but had some financial and social components, arose in the course of collaborating in planning efforts aimed at protecting and restoring slough resources. I'll also cover the issues the obstacles raised and talk about what role the Conservancy played in helping to get resolution, and offer a couple lessons learned. This is not a scientific or technical talk, but I'd be happy to provide anyone interested with how to find additional technical information that I'll be referring to, and there is plenty of it out there. The first case involves obstacles that arose in an effort to plan tidal restoration projects about a decade ago. It involved Canada geese, the FAA, and proposed tidal restoration. The second case occurred more recently and involved how changes in management of the slough mouth involving 2 threatened and endangered species impacted the process to update the slough's management plan, which was to include a sea level rise vulnerability study. I hope you'll take away from this talk that, and I hope to illustrate that these 2 case studies showed that Conservancy works to be of value in resolving complex coastal issues, helping its partners leverage resources and tools, be they financial, procedural, or technical, and that complex and complicated issues involving multiple objectives and competing interests are difficult to balance, but they can be resolved. It often just takes a lot more time, money, patience, and process than anyone ever anticipated. we understand this and have a lot of collective experience in the trenches working on these kinds of things. So I just want to introduce quickly the Glial Slough Committee, which is central to efforts to preserve the slough ecosystem, serves as a forum for Glial Slough stakeholders to address the issues affecting the ecosystem as a whole, which might not fit neatly into one jurisdiction. And composed of agency staffers, property owners, academics, and NGO representatives. The committee has no formal authority, but through dealing with agencies and applicants has a good reputation in the community. Conservancy has been part of this for at least the last decade and a half, probably the last 2 decades, and has provided assistance in key ways: restoration project development, input on technical studies, problem solving, and funding. A little bit of the setting. As you can see, it's complicated. I'd like to step back a minute and give you a little bit of background on the Glial Slough and how it's become what it is today. The slough is located about 10 miles west of Santa Barbara between the San Ynez Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. Its watershed encompasses 45 square miles and 7 major creek systems. The ecological reserve is about 2,200 acres, and the Slough State Marine Conservation Area, both of those are managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the city has some ecological preserve areas as well. The jurisdictional setting is complex, and the regulatory setting. This shows the county, the city, the university, and the airport, all in here together. To complicate that further, when you factor in all the regulatory agencies such as the Coastal Commission, State Lands, Federal Aviation, resource agencies, and Caltrans gas storage facility, et cetera, you can see it's quite complicated. So just a little bit of history. The slough was, and Santa Barbara in general, was an area settled by the Chumash for at least 10,000 years, and I just want to point out a couple of key events that happened historically. Goleta Slough used to be Goleta Bay. It was a deep water port, 18 square miles in size, where Goletas or Goletas, schooner ships, could navigate well into the bay, nearly a mile inland, according to local lore. All this changed as the area was settled and agriculture and grazing expanded, which resulted in a highly significant storm event in the winter of 1861 and 62, in which record rains fell, causing hillsides that were denuded of vegetation to erode and fill in much of the slough. In subsequent decades, the filling continued, and during World War II, an airfield was built in the middle of the slough, and that is now Santa Barbara Airport. Just wanted to show you these quick aerials. This is before the airport was built. The round landform you see is Mescalon Island, which was a Chumash village settlement, and then that was 1938, and then by 1943, it's almost completely destroyed. The ecosystem of the slough today, what do we have left to work with? It's a shadow of its former self, but the complex of tidal, brackish, and freshwater wetlands and upland and edge habitats is still functional. The extent of tidal wetlands and the tidal prism have been greatly reduced, but yet in spite of the steady encroachment of humanity, a lot of restoration has occurred, and the slough is still home to a wide variety of species and provides important ecosystem functions. Excuse me. Such as terrestrial and aquatic habitat for threatened and endangered species, floodwater attenuation, filtering of pollutants, etc. So what is the issue at hand? Well, this aerial shows you it's very complex, lots of issues. Infrastructure and ecosystems don't always get along, and with an airport and major infrastructure operating within this ecosystem, conflicts are bound to arise. The threats to the slough ecosystem are many and ever present, primarily from development, but other threats include the need for restoration, sedimentation, having too much or too little, single species management, and many more. So Here's another issue, major flooding. This is the airport in 1969. Runways are at about 11 foot above sea level. Here's another issue. This is the Goleta Beach, which is just on the outer edge of the slough, and the slough mouth is within Goleta Beach County Park. These are storm waves in 2014. That same storm, March 1st, crashing a boat into the pier, which is why we need management plans. Many of the slough's management issues were identified in an ecosystem management plan created by the committee in the 90s as mitigation for impacts associated with airport master plan that became part of the city's airport local coastal program, and which proposed slough resource protection policies for the city and other jurisdictions to adopt and guided actions in and around the slough until it was updated recently. So the first case study or example I want to talk about is not long after that first management plan was in place. We were involved with the committee as the airport was planning the restoration for airport projects that had impacted the slough. And expansion, restoration of tidal wetland was proposed. The Federal Aviation Administration said no due to high bird strike hazard. And experimental study was done to find out if that was actually true. It turned out that the tidal salt marsh habitat actually attracted lower flying birds, and the freshwater ponding freshwater areas attracted the worst offenders like the Canada geese that are known to take down even large planes. So the study results convinced the FAA that tidal restoration did not in fact increase bird strike hazards, and the restoration project was allowed to move forward. And as I understand it, it led to other changes for other airports that the FAA regulates. So yes, the Coastal Conservancy helped identify issues and shape the study and was willing to fund it if it couldn't be funded by the airport, but ultimately the airport did fund it. So one lesson is don't give up, collaborate, and take the time to study it to get to the truth. So that's, sorry, I missed the slide. The second example I'd like to mention is around the update of the management plan that was to include a sea level rise study. The committee undertook a process to update the Goleta Slough Ecosystem Management Plan in the early 2012. The goal of this effort was to bring a management plan completed in 1997 into the 21st century by updating existing conditions, adding digital maps, etc. At the same time, the Conservancy was supporting sea level rise hazard modeling and mapping in Monterey Bay. And after hearing about the Monterey work and finding another study to kind of use as a template, the committee decided that it would be a good idea to hire consultants and incorporate a sea level rise study into the management plan update. So the Conservancy not only initiated the discussion, but also provided about half the funding for the update and helped the committee find additional funding and helped with finalizing the document. One small obstacle that we encountered in this process was finding other funding sources, which we ultimately found about 6 others. The update was important. We wanted the update to consider sea level rise because Goleta Slough is already impacted by the kinds of hazards that are expected to increase as sea levels rise, including flooding, especially in combination with storms, waves, high tides, and as the shoreline evolves in response to more frequent or intense events. Given the significance of the slough, in terms of both its infrastructure and ecology, the committee decided to assess the vulnerability of both types of assets. The committee often discussed issues around existing flooding and storm impacts already occurring in the slough and serious beach erosion occurring at neighboring Goleta Beach, which is home to the slough mouth. So the purpose of the study was to, I should be back here, sorry. The purpose of the study was to describe sea level rise projections for the slough, include a stakeholder component, and determine the vulnerable assets and establish thresholds at various elevations. and develop a range of measures to address these vulnerable assets. So what we did not expect, we hoped it would inform local policies and capital improvement projects such as the airport master plan, LCP updates, et cetera, and inform ecosystem management. And when we started, we thought it would take about a year, year and a half. What we didn't realize is that this issue arose in the middle of the project. Basically, the slough mouth is mechanically controlled, breached when the levels get too high, and it happens by about 2 times a year by the flood control district in Santa Barbara County. And they had been doing this for the past 30 years or so at the request of regulatory agencies. But when they applied for an Army Corps permit to continue routine maintenance dredging of sediment in the slough, they also asked permission to continue this mouth management, and they were denied. The other federal agencies with whom the Army Corps must consult issued jeopardy opinions due to new research showing the high value of closed estuaries for steelhead and tidewater goby. So in order to get the permit, the flood control district will be required to do additional studies. They withdrew the permit application because it had been they had been breaching as a courtesy in the past resource agencies not for flood control unless emergency conditions existed. So this led to many months of prolonged high water levels in the slough, causing anoxic conditions and due to the drought and no tidal flushing. Thus, the management regime had changed with no environmental review triggered. The city found that when water levels got to about 10 feet, the airport facilities were approaching flooding, but not quite, at which point the city went out for a coastal commission permit to try a number of creative non-mechanical breaching ways of bringing flow levels down, water levels down, such as siphoning, berm shaving, and finally when levels got to where the property was actually threatened, they could do emergency mechanical breaching. So a lot of issues were raised in this process for the federal resource agencies. Rapid and premature flushing of endangered species constituted a potential take, and yet Goleta Slough Committee looks at the whole picture, and therefore some were upset at what they considered single species management because there's a lot of marine resources that use the open tidal condition. The airport wanted to deal with its own issues around high water levels and a spike in encephalitis carrying mosquito populations which occurred, and more higher hazard for bird strikes because of the ponding. And so they took the lead on, the city took the lead, airport took the lead on conducting additional biological assessments required by the funding agencies. Flooded or drowned marsh is bad for the slough ecosystem, and it's bad for some of the species. So such as the building savanna sparrow that nests and breeds in the high marsh. The flooding can eventually turn marsh into mudflat if inundated for long enough. So all this confusion also held up our sea level rise study because it changed the baseline conditions that were the underlying assumptions. So after much discussion, modeling was done using data for an open condition for the study, and the Conservancy played a role in helping resolve some of these issues, holding up the study by finding funding for additional hydraulic modeling. So we moved forward, and even though it wasn't an ideal situation, now that information that's been gathered in the biostudies can be incorporated at a future time. So we used a lot of strategies to move the project forward, to find additional money, and keep everybody engaged in the process. Since its completion, the sea level rise study information has been used as a foundation for other studies and LCP updates by other local jurisdictions, as well as by a California Sea Grant in its coastal ecosystem vulnerability assessment. So I just answered that question, how it can be used, and some of the lessons learned, basically just keep at it, persistence, and keep the collaboration constructive. And you know, understand everybody has their own perspective. In the sea level rise study, we grouped stakeholders by sectors when we asked for their input, which made them feel safe in talking about, you know, the vulnerabilities of the things they cared about. And we just kept flexible. So the Goleta Slough and the Conservancy, I think, take the big picture of the whole ecosystem. So this project is a work in progress. Need to take the study to the next level, engage a broader community, and do additional analysis for future updates. So that's my talk. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions afterwards. If you'd like more information, both management plans are at goletaslough.org. Thank you. And now I'll introduce Sam Jenniches, who is going to present next.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to take us a little bit east of the Goleta Slough. My name is Sam Jenniches, and I'm the Conservancy's project manager for the Matilija Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project. The Matilija Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project, I'm going to first spend a few minutes introducing the dam's history so we have a base of understanding to work from before getting into the nuts and bolts of the project as it has transpired during the Conservancy's period of involvement. Matilija Dam is located in Ventura County on Matilija Creek, a tributary of the Ventura River, approximately 16 river miles from the ocean. Since 1947, Matilija Dam has blocked transport of nearly 8 million cubic yards of fine and coarse sediment, preventing it from naturally moving downstream to the ocean, resulting in loss of the reservoir's original function of water storage for agricultural needs, loss of downstream sand and gravel-sized materials necessary to promote habitat, loss of sediment needed to maintain county beaches like Surfers Point, and increased erosion of the Ventura River streambed. The dam also prevents Southern California steelhead from reaching the high-quality habitat of Upper Matilija Creek, which prior to dam construction was one of the most productive spawning and rearing habitats in the Ventura River system. In the decade preceding World War II, West Ventura County had an increasing population, and the county was seeking a reliable source of water for its growing agricultural community, and saw the proposed dam as effective flood control as well. But the dam should have never been built. A 1941 Corps of Engineers study concluded that Matilija would not provide adequate benefits to be cost-effective for flood control and water supply. California Fish and Wildlife staff feared it would imperil the large run of steelhead on the system, estimated at over 5,000 annually. But the county went ahead on its own, and the project was bond funded in 1945, with the construction beginning in 1946, even though there were warnings against the planned use of reactive alkali aggregate in the project. And really, it just got worse from there. There were cost overruns, expected silting in of the reservoir in a matter of 40 years. There was a major fish kill due to stagnant water behind the dam in 1949. It was condemned as unsafe in its original height in 1964 due to the aggregate reactivity. Removal estimates were provided for the first time at this time, though the county opted to notch the dam, and years later it was notched again to its current height. Sure you get the picture. Jumping ahead toward the turn of the century, the Southern California Steelhead Trout Evolutionary Significant Unit, or ESU, was one of the ESUs federally listed as endangered in 1997, and the Ventura River watershed is considered a Core 1 priority for restoration. So now we've got a dilapidated dam that has lost almost all utility and has increasing potential as a liability to the county. Beach is starved of sand the trapped sediment can't provide, and a federally endangered species in need of recovery. That's the quick version. And in spite of the endangered status of the southern steelhead, it seems to have been the beach nourishment issue that really resonated with local government most. In light of all this, and with mounting pressure from environmental groups like Sacramento's Friends of the River and Ventura County chapter of the Surfrider Foundation, in 1998, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors resolved to remove the Matilija Dam, and the first studies were begun to investigate it, the first of many studies. It was at this time that the Coastal Conservancy started its involvement with the project. The Conservancy provided significant funding for the Bureau of Reclamation's dam removal appraisal in 2000, participated in the Matilija Dam Removal Demonstration Project in 2001, before entering into the project partnership with the Ventura County Watershed Protection District and the Corps of Engineers. obstacles. But first, I'd like to take a few moments to briefly introduce the players before we go any further. I've mentioned the County Watershed Protection District, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Corps of Engineers, local nonprofits, and the Coastal Conservancy. In addition to these, project stakeholders also include regulatory agencies like the National Marine Fisheries Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Local water agencies are important voices, both large and small. Local landowners, agricultural producers, business groups also have an interest in the project. And the goal goes beyond simple dam removal and involves access as well. I'm sure you can imagine that the removal of a 170-foot dam with over 8 million cubic yards of impounded sediment is a complicated affair, no matter what's downstream. On Matilija Creek and the Ventura River, we have bridges, levees, communities, water delivery infrastructure, including a major diversion in Canal de Casitas Reservoir, and so on. However, even with these various stakeholders and project components, we started with a general consensus that the dam would be best removed. It was a barrier to fish passage, a sediment sink, and provided negligible water storage or flood control. It was in increasingly poor condition, though still not unsafe due to the notching, and not far from being totally full of sediment. Generally, people understood it was time. But how to do it? The Corps Feasibility Study initiated in 2001 and completed in 2004 created the Design Oversight Group, or DOG, an assemblage of all potential stakeholders. The DOG provided a forum for stakeholder voices and concerns to be heard during the alternatives analysis. As a result, the feasibility study resulted in a general consensus on the preferred project points in 2004, and a preferred alternative was selected. This alternative involved a single-phase removal of the dam with approximately 2 million cubic yards of fine sediment slurried downstream to a storage location past the Robles diversion. Larger sediment upstream of the dam would be left in place and capped with soil cement for gradual erosion over time. While we had a general consensus on the preferred project points, the design was preliminary and many details were yet to be fleshed out. During the design phase, the project was authorized under the Water Resources Development Act of 2007, perceived as a significant milestone in the likelihood that the federal project could be realized. The ensuing design phase of the project brought about the first truly major obstacles for the project, and those played out over a period of a few years. As Liz talked about in her introduction, these obstacles included financial, procedural, and social obstacles. The 2 million cubic yards of sediment has been the source of the greatest amount of discussion during the alternatives analysis. It was considered a significant threat to water providers, both at the Robles diversion and at well sites in the floodplain downstream. Complicating matters, during sediment coring of the reservoir material, methane gas was encountered at multiple core sites, indicating a nutrient layer within the fines, which could pose an even greater threat to Casitas Reservoir downstream. The safest method would be to mechanically manage those fines, eliminating the potential for their release. The cost estimates for the slurry operations preferred site ballooned, prompting the Corps and Watershed Protection District to suggest less costly alternative sites. However, the response to this financial obstacle created both procedural and social obstacles. The alternative fine sediment management sites met significant opposition from environmental advocates and landowners, and also brought about questions and concerns from regulatory agencies. The management of fine sediment was to be our first major obstacle. As I said, each of the alternatives for fines management was met with some form of opposition. While dam removal was gaining traction in the west, only the 45-foot Marmot Dam seen here had been removed. Elwha and Glines Canyon were still in place, as were the Klamath Dams and Condit. We didn't have a lot of examples to draw lessons from. While project partners and the DOG members were discussing the relative merits and of the different alternatives without much success, the various dam removal projects in design and analysis were generating models and scholarship. Of those studies on sediment management and dam removal projects, one of them was authored by a consultant group that the Conservancy had frequently worked with and who had pertinent experience on Southern California rivers. This study was circulated amongst Conservancy staff, and the Conservancy's project manager at the time took advantage of that opportunity to use our staff as a sounding board to discuss the study's relevance to Matilija. This is a perfect example of how our staff, along with our suite of projects and contacts, becomes a valuable resource for overcoming obstacles. The main sticking point on the fine sediment issue was the number of unknowns regarding sediment behavior in dam removal projects, particularly in the conditions we see in Southern California with episodic flows and high sediment production. It's a little reminiscent of Donald Rumsfeld talking about unknowns, and unknown unknowns, and known unknowns, and known knowns. We had a lot of things going on in this project. This created another opportunity for the Conservancy to intervene to move the project forward. The discussion surrounding fine sediment had become increasingly adversarial and fruitless. As a funding agency and a project partner, the Conservancy had the status and the means to help foster a solution to the fine sediment issue. We proposed professional facilitation on the fine sediment topic and contracted with a consultant that had worked successfully on past Conservancy projects. Again, the Conservancy was drawing from its network of partners. A focused, facilitated fine sediment management group would ensure that we were moving forward around common goals and understanding. During the course of the 4 full-day meetings, the Sediment Management Study Group worked together in a collaborative problem-solving process to define the problems and establish a common understanding, identify the key concerns and technical questions, list important constraints, and identify and prioritize the key data gaps. The following general operating principles guided the deliberations of the study group. Simply, it was about listening, communicating, and working towards a common goal. To that end, members committed to expending the time necessary to meet the objectives of the group, recognized the complexities involved, treated each other with courtesy and respect, were prepared to listen intently, and were understanding of each other's interests and perspectives, and regarded disagreements as problems to be solved rather than battles to be won. The Fine Sediment Study Group ran for a relatively short period of the overall project, but succeeded in bringing the project back from the brink of breakdown over a very difficult issue. While it wasn't possible to generate consensus on a design alternative to move forward with, we were able to identify a process that would move the project forward. The group identified 3 preferred design alternatives to move forward and agreed to recommend that a set of technical studies be undertaken that would close data gaps and create a greater deal of certainty over the unknowns related to these alternatives. Following on from the Fine Sediment Management Group, the DOG agreed to move forward with the recommended technical studies. The Conservancy again provided funding for these technical studies, and the DOG named a Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC, to draft the scope of these studies and follow them through to completion. This provided another opportunity for the Conservancy to draw upon our experience and partners. The TAC was created to represent stakeholder groups, of course, and regulatory agencies and project partners. But additionally, the Conservancy pushed for the inclusion of outside experience or fresh eyes on the projects. 2 developments really spurred on the desire to have new eyes on the project. Firstly, dams were coming out. We suddenly had case studies to learn from and expertise that could be provided from folks involved with those projects. We were seeing examples that suggested that natural flushing of sediment was considerably faster and more complete than previously thought, given certain conditions. And this could potentially save a great deal of money. Second, we hadn't had a federal appropriation of funds towards the core project for years, and the political climate in D.C. was not looking promising for any in the near future. In fact, several stakeholders were convinced that the authorized federal project would never go forward because of this issue. This fundamentally changed how we viewed this next set of studies. Multiple stakeholders, as well as the Conservancy, held the view that any further work should include an option or options that weren't contingent on federal funding or a federal project. The TAC developed scopes for the studies that would close the identified data gaps, and the presence of these new eyes on the project helped prevent us from the tendency towards remaining trapped by the 15-plus years of work that had already gone into the project. Some questions were worth asking again. Some alternatives were worth renewed consideration, and we also asked new questions. The end result was a preferred alternative that was outside the scope of the federally authorized project with near unanimous support. This was a really remarkable development. It required stakeholders to philosophically let go of the hard-won federal authorization in 2007, to partially let go of the previous time, labor, and money put towards the first alternative, though a lot of that would apply to this new alternative, and to embrace a future that would have yet more obstacles. However, this new alternative is seen as ecologically superior, it's less expensive, and it's generated significant momentum as well as new partners. And those new partners are very important to our process. Communication, and particularly listening, is a critical part of overcoming obstacles. The Conservancy's projects universally involve multiple stakeholders, often with differing objectives or needs. Sometimes consensus comes easily, often it doesn't. We take the long view, and we know that the successes of our projects and partners depend on consistency and relationships. The collective experience gained from managing over 3,000 projects in our agency's history allows us to contribute to this kind of outcome. Thanks for your attention, and again, we'll take questions after all three presentations. But now I'm going to hand things over to Michael Bowen, who will present our last case study.
Thank you very much, Sam. As you can see, many of these projects take a long time, and I'm going to compress a 30-year project into about 15 minutes, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'm Michael Bowen. I'm with the North Coast Work Group of the Coastal Conservancy. And I'd like to begin this presentation by acknowledging the many people that have worked in the Eel River Delta on this project that I'll be discussing and others, particularly the Humboldt County Resource Conservation District, staff and board, the Salt River Watershed Council, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and particularly the late Supervisor Jimmy Smith, who brought a historic and unimaginably grand project to fruition. For 150 years post-reclamation of the Eel River Estuary, several exciting projects are underway. Each involves historic ecosystem restoration, agricultural enhancement, sea level rise adaptation planning, and a variety of partners, including the Coastal Conservancy. The projects are, to the north, the Ocean Ranch Ecosystem Restoration Project, to the south, in green, the Eel River Estuary and Sandoval Slough Enhancement Project, and last but not least, the subject of my part of the webinar today, the Salt River Ecosystem Restoration Project. So as you can see in the Eel River Delta, historic change is underway. And as mentioned earlier, and in my experience, there are three kinds of hurdles. Procedural, that involves environmental compliance and permitting, getting the paperwork done. Financial, building the war chest for your project. And of course, social, building enough consensus and momentum, and both are needed to reach completion. First, a few words about the area. This is the mouth of the Eel River. It is a place of superlatives. It's California's third largest river system. It is second to the Yangtze on sediment load in the world. It was once Pacific Coast's fourth largest salmon run, exceeding 1 million fish in some years. It is a highly dynamic environment that has supported wildlife populations and the development of a rich agricultural economy on the fertile delta soils. This is also a rapidly changing area, physically with sea level rise, triple juncture zone, socially, from no government presence for many, many years to lots with these projects in an agricultural area. And economically, the North Coast is overall a disadvantaged area, and these projects bring in big infusions of cash into the restoration economy. But all of this is change, and change can sometimes generate hurdles, and some of those will be the topic of our discussion today. What I hope I can convey is that good communication and determination won't solve every problem, but it is the key ingredient to overcoming every challenge. So let's start with a little historical ecology. The Eel Delta used to be bigger, a lot bigger. In fact, it was fully navigable to ocean-going vessels. The extensive channels were maintained by the flushing action of the tide, a vast scouring engine that kept channels clear and navigable. The Salt River and Sandoval Slough, depicted on this navigational map, were principal points in this journey. Then came the reclamation of the 19th and 20th centuries. Tidal prism was truncated, scouring diminished, channels filled. And rather quickly, the vast tidal slough network disappeared. For a century, this translated to more pasture, and which was a strong benefit for the community, if not the aquatic species and the fish that depended on the estuary. But when Mother Nature's adaptive management plan, otherwise known as tidal prism, disappeared, and the same rain and sediment kept coming down, it had nowhere to go. And the result was hydraulic dysfunction, flooding and ponding of the valuable agricultural land that had been reclaimed not so long ago. Think about it. Prior to project implementation of the Salt River Project, one could step across tidal sloughs that were once 200 feet wide and 20 feet deep. And all the water carried by those filled channels, all the sediment transported down, was now spread across the land, a mile wide and an inch deep. Problems followed. This is where the Conservancy first entered the picture. The hardworking landowners battling these forces formed a resource conservation district specifically to find solutions to this situation. The residents had always lived with flooding, but when the water was unable to depart, the problem was catastrophic to them. The newly formed RCD came to the Coastal Conservancy for help, and we provided that RCD with its first grant in 1991. The RCD hired the Natural Resources Conservation Service, who performed an extensive study. And with their best minds at work, the NRCS made several startling conclusions. 1, the area had a high sediment load. 2, the channels were filled. 3, the only logical solution to the problem would be to build dams for sediment detention basins on each stream tributary to the Salt River, and then dredge a big channel out of the Salt River and allow drainage to resume. And finally, 4, doing so would be too expensive, so forget it. Well, this was a very unsatisfying outcome for the young RCD. But undaunted, and in its sheer desperation, the RCD went to that place of last resort, Congress. The great Congressman Mike Thompson steered several earmarks toward the Army Corps of Engineers, enabling the federal government to work with the community and other agencies and the county government on alternative approaches. The Corps boosted efforts by providing crucial deliverables, such as a LIDAR survey and wetlands delineations that were really necessary for project development and permitting. But it was soon realized that the need was bigger than an earmark, and future congressional support was uncertain. And so the Coastal Conservancy stepped in again, providing more funding. Now, shifting gears can be challenging, as Sam alluded to earlier. Leaving the Corps and the prospect of massive amounts of federal funding behind was hard. But the community did so, and they cobbled together a variety of planning grants, primarily from the Conservancy. Funds now flowed directly to a highly motivated county of Humboldt and its small but energetic RCD. Together, they leveraged their first major grant from the State Water Resources Control Board, the first multi-million-dollar grant the project had received. More grants came. Much of the grant writing was done in-house here at the Conservancy to help the RCD build its capacity for such an unprecedentedly large undertaking. Something else happened at this time, too, that was very important. Riverside Ranch. As you see on the left of this graphic, there's a large area known as Riverside Ranch, which became the keystone of this project. At the time, the owner of this dairy that was at the end of the Salt River and heavily impacted by flooding and saltwater intrusion approached Supervisor Jimmy Smith and asked if he could help. Indeed, he could. Supervisor Smith approached the team, and to make a long story short, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Coastal Conservancy, and the Wildlife Conservation Board jumped in with critically important grants for acquisition of this property. With this property, an evolving and excellent design incorporating a significant land acquisition at Riverside Ranch made for a very enticing project that started attracting more funding. Estimated at $16 million at the time, not including acquisition costs, 46 willing landowners along the channel, 7.7 miles of channel, set their sights on success. A quick note on social hurdles and constraints at this time. Flooding Riverside Ranch to become part of the project was not universally popular. And this is part of the social change that was underway that became a challenge to overcome. Habitat restoration rubbed some the wrong way. It seemed a distraction from the agricultural improvement. But still, the project proceeded with a few minor hiccups along the way, including the need to acquire 22 acres along the project footprint, the Tosti parcel, which the Conservancy funded to provide sufficient wetlands acreage to satisfy permit requirements. Now, back to Supervisor Smith for a moment. As you've probably inferred, the key issue here all along was helping local elected officials meld the community desire for drainage with funders' desire for ecosystem restoration, and then showing the regulatory community that this was the balance required of a successful project. Finally, all, or at least most all, embraced the project. In nearly a 30-year wait, the project was ready for groundbreaking, and the community excitement was palpable. But as Winston Churchill said, this was not the beginning of the end, it was the end of the beginning. For just as the RCD board met to certify their environmental impact report, in walked two farmers and filed a notice of intent to sue on behalf of the State Farm Bureau Federation, it turns out. This was appalling and a shock to the community. Many loyal Farm Bureau members threatened to tear up their cards in response. But as it turns out, the Farm Bureau had two very good points. First, the Williamson Act contract on the land at Riverside Ranch needed to be canceled to proceed. Second, although everyone agreed the project would improve agriculture, no one had really analyzed how much or how well. And so in that sense, the secret document, the EIR, was truly insufficient. The Conservancy stepped in again, working closely with our colleagues at the Department of Conservation, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and the county. We helped resolve the cancellation issue with the Williamson Act. Then we worked hard to analyze agricultural productivity. Would the project truly and measurably benefit agriculture in the coastal zone? Ever wondered how many pounds of grass it takes to create 32.5 ice cream cones? I certainly hadn't asked these questions, but we figured it out by conducting an agricultural analysis on the loss and gain of agricultural land in the coastal zone. This, in combination with the settlement of the Williamson Act issue, and with a tremendous outpouring of community support for the much-awaited project, enabled the RCD to take the project to bid timely. It also helped the Coastal Commission in its analysis to balance the various impacts of the project and issue a unique and truly huge coastal development permit for the project. Groundbreaking, hooray! Newly excavated and restored channels provide newly restored drainage to surrounding agricultural lands, while also hosting newly restored aquatic habitat for many species. Agency input from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife helped maximize habitat potential for a variety of species. Nature filled the vacuum quickly with an abundance of life. Coho, longfin smelt, tidewater goby, lamprey eel are among the recent aquatic beneficiaries. Bird and plant response is similarly remarkable. And the Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW continue to help good guide design and post-project monitoring so that we all learn as we do. Oh, pardon me. But what about that ice cream? Well, the agricultural community reports that drainage has improved to levels not experienced since the 1960s. That drainage now occurs through restored channels that feature rich riparian communities and significantly increased and improved aquatic habitat. And it looks better than a traditional flood control project. A quick word about overcoming financial hurdles. This $16 million project had now ballooned into a roughly $45 million public works project. And although Riverside Ranch, with its many habitat features, had been relatively easy to fund, underscore relatively, the re-excavated miles of the Salt River Channel were a harder sell. Yet, the RCD, with a fair amount of help from others in the Conservancy, was able to reach out to many diverse funding sources to achieve the project completion in its totality. And as many residents have said, they never believed it would happen. So everything is going great. The local economy was benefiting from tens of millions of dollars in construction dollars flooding in. Drainage was increased, improving substantially the agricultural economy of the area. The Salt River Watershed Council, formed of local landowners, was beginning to take charge and discuss long-term management under the 10-year permit structure the project provided. In short, the project had become an immense source of local pride. What could possibly go wrong? Well, remember, the project depended on each 47 landowner along the channel adhering to their access agreement in the face of both profound changes and the temptation to try and harvest new and untraditional crops by simply threatening to withdraw critical support for the project. This compact was tested sorely when a key landowner reneged on his landowner access agreement, harpooning that year's construction season in the process. Negotiations ensued. Public pressure mounted. The RCD, the Conservancy, and its partners worked feverishly with the local congressman, the county, and anyone who would listen to overcome this hurdle. Litigation was even considered, but it was recognized that in addition to being slow and expensive, it would send absolutely the wrong signal about a community-supported project. The short of it is, and the good news, is that detailed and strong communication within and outside the community overcame this challenge in the end, enabling construction to resume. A few words about process now and procedural hurdles, and a shout out to the regulatory community that helped navigate project development, particularly the Coastal Commission. If you think of the project as a three-legged stool, there's Riverside Ranch with its estuary for prism and habitat. There's the Salt River Channel for drainage and habitat. And less well known and appreciated, but equally important to the landowners, there's the Adaptive Management Plan and associated 10-year permits for management that were developed in the project. The permits enable the RCD and community to maintain this area as a working landscape within specific and explicit geographic and regulatory boundaries. For example, if the channel fills by 30% and performs poorly, the RCD can excavate, and the community will be there to help without getting pulled through a regulatory knothole. In other words, maintenance of working lands is defined and pre-permitted in a way that benefits farmers and the local ecology. Shifting north back to the Ocean Ranch project, will we have similar challenges? Absolutely. Some will be similar, some will be new, but there will be hurdles. Property owned by California Department of Fish and Wildlife is not a working landscape like the other project areas, but it is next to some. How about the Eel River Estuary and Sandoval Slough Enhancement Project, formerly the Conic Ranch, now owned by the Wildlands Conservancy? Yes, we have challenges galore, including a CEQA challenge to the proposed project by neighbors. But failure is not an option here. The sea is rising and the elevations are low, and thus the Conservancy, all property owners and their attorneys, and technical experts are deeply immersed in discussions about resolving differences on project approach. That is going well, and before long, we will be applying many of the lessons on permitting and funding that were garnered in the Salt River process for the benefit of working lands and rich ecosystems. The Coastal Conservancy and the landowners also working closely with local groups and the Fish and Wildlife Service to assess the vulnerabilities to existing dune networks and to examine dune enhancement techniques that could well provide this unique but threatened agriculture and ecologically rich area with a new lease on life in the face of sea level rise. So it goes to show that every important undertaking will have problems and obstacles. Every effort is a marathon, not a 50-yard dash. Staying positive and constructive and maintaining clear communication while keeping your eye on the prize is essential to success. Great projects tend to offer mutual benefit for all, and the Conservancy is very lucky to have the opportunity to work with exceptional organizations, agencies, individuals, local governments, and others, and tribes in order to improve our environment and our economy. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Rachel, Sam, and Michael for your excellent presentations and insights. If you have any questions now, go ahead and start typing those into the chat box. But before we get to the Q&A, I just wanted to let you all know about the latest Climate Ready Technical Assistance Grant, where we are hoping to build capacity into projects that are focused primarily on communities vulnerable to climate change. The case studies presented here today provide a wonderful example of what we at the Conservancy have to offer in terms of expertise and assistance. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go to our webpage, scc.ca.gov/climate-change here on the screen to learn more about the grant. All right, so I have a question for the three presenters, circling back to our initial poll. What do you all think is the most challenging type of obstacle that you faced in your projects, and why?
It's a tough, I mean, for Matilija, I think, because it's such a large project, that the biggest challenge is going to be the financial hurdle. It's been what has delayed the project probably more than anything over the years, and you know, we're going to be looking towards funding a project that's probably in the end going to be between $100 and $150 million, and finding that funding is a huge hurdle. I mean, fortunately, we have a really dedicated group of partners that are exhausting every last opportunity for funding and turning over stone after stone. So I think the project's in really good hands on that, but that's probably going to be the largest. It has been and will probably continue to be the largest hurdle for us.
I think that all of the hurdles can be challenging at different times. As a general matter, social hurdles can typically be overcome when a project offers mutual benefit. Financial hurdles are difficult, but they're quantifiable. And so, in that sense, they're more tractable. I believe that procedural hurdles are one of the most significant challenges because frequently the answer to overcoming the hurdle is not always altogether clear. And it makes it very difficult for restoration practitioners and project proponents to address the questions or concerns that they have been presented.
Rachel, did you want to provide your input on this question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. I would echo what Michael said and say that procedural hurdles are the most difficult, given that each situation is unique and must be navigated, you know, again each time, and just given how often there is just a large number of competing interests that are potentially at odds in any given project. So, procedural.
Okay. So we have a question, this one specifically from Michael. What was key in resolving the Eel River grumpy landowner issue? Making changes to meet their interests, gaining trust, etc.?
So in that particular instance, I think a combination of factors helped resolve, for the time being, that concern. And probably the most significant was the broad and extensive community support for the project. The community had embraced a sense of common purpose and common good, and though there were many sacrifices made along that path and along that footprint, there was a general recognition that the project was being conducted for the common good. And I think in the end, that alone was probably the factor that helped move that dialogue in a constructive direction.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, it looks like we're getting pretty close to 2 o'clock, so I think I'm going to wrap up the Q&A session here. But if you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be sending out a follow-up email with the webinar material, so you can reach out to me through that message. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar, and thank you again to our wonderful speakers.